Hey everybody, so today we're going to be learning Chapter 7, Lesson 3. We are working on solving and writing subtraction equations. Okay, earlier in class I talked about learning targets and what our goal for this lesson is. So every lesson we have a goal, and in this lesson, our learning targets, I wrote them over here in case we didn't remember them. They are in the front of the room. So if you can't read this, just look at the whiteboard in the front of the room. They are posted on the board. Okay, so our learning targets for today, I can solve subtraction equations by using the addition property of equality, and I can write equations when solving real-world problems by using variables and expressions. So we talked a little bit about these today in class. We talked about how it relates to the previous lesson. So this first learning target, I can solve subtraction equations by using the addition property of equality. Well, yesterday in lesson 2, we worked on solving addition equations by using the subtraction property of equality. Okay, so we worked on some similar concepts, but today we're working on different types of equations and a different type of property of equality. So really try to understand this. If you have any questions, let me know. You can always ask a partner. And then our second learning target, I can write equations when solving real-world problems by using variables and expressions. This learning target, really our goal is to just understand what a word problem is saying and be able to write an equation from that word problem using variables and expressions. Okay, so I want you to do something with this learning target. So this is our learning target. We talked about it in class. You talked about it with a neighbor. Now I want you to write learning target and in parentheses our goals on the main idea side, and then on this side here I want you to explain what you think our learning targets are for today. And don't worry about it being word for word. Think about what you understand from the learning target and what you think it means. So just over here, once again, write what you think our learning targets for the day is. If you need to glance at the whiteboard in the front, feel free to do so. Okay. And then we are going to do something, we're going to reflect on this at the end of the lesson as well. So make sure you have this written down. Okay, so Chapter 7, Lesson 3, we are focusing on solving and writing subtraction equations, which I want to refer back to our learning target. Our goal is to solve subtraction equations and to be able to write them. Okay, so we're working on solving and writing today. First thing we're going to write down is just a little review from Lesson 2 yesterday. Okay, so in Lesson 2, and you might want to give yourself some room here. Lesson 2, we talked about a scale, right? An equation being a scale. So we're going to draw a little scale. Okay, and an equation is a scale. It's a balance. So it's going to be straight. One side is not going to be lopsided, right? Because if it's lopsided, it's not equal. And an equation is equal. Okay, so we have our balance, our scale, and it's balanced. Both sides are equal to each other. And then we also learned about inverse operations. Okay, so with inverse operations, we learned that an inverse operation usually undoes something, right? So like if we are adding, the inverse for addition is subtraction. Okay, so let's write those down here. So if we're adding, the inverse to addition is subtraction. If we are subtracting, the inverse to subtraction is addition. Okay, remember it just means we're finding out what operation will undo it. So addition will undo subtraction. And with multiplication, division undoes multiplication, so it's inverse, and with division, the inverse for division is multiplication, okay? So we will be using these and referring back to them throughout the day. All right, so we are going to start off by writing a new property of equality down that we have not learned yet. So this is going to be the addition property of equality. Yesterday we learned about the subtraction property of equality. Today we're learning about the addition property of equality. So let's write down a definition. So the addition property of equality means you can add some amount to both sides So it means you can add some amount to both sides. So if we think of our scale, we can add an amount to this side and this side. And if we do that, then the scale will stay balanced. Okay, remember we talked a little bit about that yesterday with the subtraction property of equality. If we take something away from both sides, it's going to be balanced. So the addition property of equality means we can add the same amount to both sides and it's going to stay balanced. In terms of a mathematical equation, it's our equation is going to stay equal, okay? All right, and I'm going to highlight this. If you have a highlighter, highlight it with yellow. We are going to do a little highlighting later on as well. We're going to use the yellow again later. Okay. So now that we understand the addition property of equality, okay, this is part of our learning target. Our learning target was I can solve subtraction equations by using the addition property of equality. So now that we know what the addition property of equality is, okay, we're going to write down a word problem, kind of our second part of the learning target. We're going to write down the word problem. We're going to break it down into different steps following a process. We've talked about following a process before. So that we can learn to solve and write equations. Okay, so here is our situation. So Alex's rollerblades cost $70.25 less than his bike. His rollerblades, RB stands for rollerblades, cost $43.50. Okay, so Alex's rollerblades cost $70.25 less than his bike. So that makes sense, right? That his rollerblades would cost less than a bike. And then it tells us his rollerblades cost $43.50. So we have some different pieces of information from what this is telling us. We are going to break it down over here following a process. And then later on, we are going to use the addition property of equality. So let's start breaking it down. So first, we are going to look at the words. Okay, so the words, some important key words that we see are the cost of the bike. Okay, the cost of the bike is less than $43.50. So we are going to look at some key words. And the key words here, let's reread it. Alex's rollerblades cost $70.25 less than his bike. His rollerblades cost $43.50. So one key word I see there is less than. We learned in chapter 6 that less than means minus. Okay, so cost of the bike minus $70.25 is $43.50. So again, I got all of this over here. I know that the cost of the bike minus $70.25 is $43.50. Okay, so the rollerblades cost $70.25 less than his bike. And I know that less than from chapter 6 tells me that I'm subtracting. I'm minusing, which is why I put minus here. Okay, so now we've written some of the important words down. Now let's write down the variable. We have to define the variable. Move this a little in case you can't see it. Okay, so our variable here, I'm going to define the variable as the cost of the bike, and I'm going to choose, I can choose any letter, but I'm going to choose the letter B. So B equals cost of bike. Okay, and then it's optional. You can draw a diagram. Visuals are really hard for a lot of students. It's hard for them to draw, but some students really understand better from visuals, so we're going to draw one. And when you're following this process, I'm going to make it optional whether you want to draw a diagram, but make sure you do have this diagram in your notes today. So here's my diagram. And this diagram, okay, the whole thing represents B. And if I look what B means, B equals cost of bike. So this whole thing is the cost of the bike. And I know that the cost of the bike is $70.25. So cost of bike minus $70.25. So this tells me that it's less than it's taking away. So if this part is $70.25, this is being taken away. And then I have 43.5. So I'm going to put 43.5 here. So this whole thing is the cost of the bike minus 70.25 is 43.50, and you'd get the rollerblades from that amount. Okay? All right. Now we are going to write our equation. This is the last thing in the process. Okay, so our equation we are going to get from all of this. We have our whole situation here. We have the words. We have the variable that's defined. We have a diagram. Now we just need an equation. So my equation is going to start with the bike, B, my variable, because I know that I'm subtracting. So it's going to be the bike. I want to try to find the rollerblades, the cost of the rollerblades, which I know. But it's going to be the bike minus 70.25. So B, cost of bike, which it says right here, cost of the bike minus 70.25 is, and in math is means equals 43.50. Okay, so this is our equation right here. All right, so we followed this process. So every time you get a situation, write down the words, okay, what you understand from the situation. Define your variable, draw a diagram if you need to, and also write down the equation, the most important part, okay? This is one of our learning targets. I can write an equation when solving real-world problems by using variables and expressions, okay? An equation is two expressions being equal to each other. Well, we have an expression here equal to this expression here. So that's one of our learning targets. All right, now we are actually going to solve the equation, okay? That's the other learning target that we have. So b minus 70.25 equals 43.5. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite it over here. And now, this is when I'm going to be using the addition property of equality. This is when I'm going to be using what I learned up here. Okay, so up here I learned that you can add some amount to both sides of an equation and it's still going to stay balanced and the equation is going to stay equal to each other. So I'm going to use that over here. I'm going to add some amount to both sides of the equation. Well, I want to find out what b is. I don't know what it is. That's our variable. It's an unknown number. So this is what I want to find out. So I'm going to add some amount to this so that I get nothing but b on this side. And I'm going to add 70.25 to this side. Because if I add 70.25 to negative 70.25, I'm going to get 0. So that means I'm going to get nothing over here. If I just look at this, minus 70.25 plus 70.25, you would get nothing, okay? And then we would be left with b. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And remember, yesterday I was telling you guys, I like to put a line down the middle here. And you can do this or you can choose not to, but that line reminds me that I need to make sure whatever I do to this side, I have to do to this side. Okay, that reminds me of the addition property of equality. You have to add the same amount to both sides. And highlight that because that's really, really important. Add same amount to both sides. Okay, so I'm going to, using the addition property of equality, I'm going to add same amount to both sides. Okay, so now that I've added the same amount, I'm going to calculate it, okay? So I'm going to get b minus 70.25 plus 70.25. We said already, and I'm going to ignore this side just like I did yesterday when trying to solve. We're ignoring this side. We're only looking at this, and I'm ignoring this b right now. So if I just add this to that, I'm going to get 0 there, and I'm going to be left with b. So it's going to be b equals, now I'm going to do the same to this side. Remember when you're adding decimals, decimal needs to be in the same exact spot and everything should be lined up. So 0 plus 5 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7, 3 plus 0 is 3, and 4 plus 7 is 11. Okay, So B equals 113.75. That is my solution. Okay, that's my answer. I'm going to highlight that. Okay, so we know that that is our solution. So that's our other learning target. I can solve a subtraction equation, which this is a subtraction equation, okay, by using the addition property of equality. And we did that here. Okay. I'm going to highlight this right here because this is important. This yellow, same yellow over here, this means that we just use the addition property of equality. All right, very last thing I want to show you guys to do your check, okay? So we always need to do our check to make sure we got the answer right. So in our check, we're going to check the solution. To check the solution, we are going to plug this solution back into our variable in the original problem. So I'm going to rewrite this. B minus 70.25 equals 43.50. Okay, I'm going to plug in the solution in for my variable. 113.75 minus 70.25 equals 43.50. Now, if my solution is correct, I should get the same thing on both sides of the equation, because remember, an equation is balanced. Okay, and if I use my calculator, do the calculations, I'm going to get 43.5 equals 43.5. So my equation is balanced. This is correct. Okay. So now that we've finished with the lesson, we've checked our solution. Okay, this is the solve part. And up here, this is the right part. And if we look back at our title, we're solving and writing subtraction equations. So we wrote, we solved, and we checked our answer, and we accomplished what we needed to in our learning targets. So you originally wrote your learning targets, what you thought the learning targets were at the very beginning. Remember that? Okay, now I want you to look back at your learning targets, whatever you wrote up here. I want you to look back and think if you agree with what you wrote for your learning target. If you think maybe you understand the learning target better, you can change it, okay? But just look back at the learning target and reflect. Do you feel like you now understand what the learning target is asking? If you have any questions, let me know. We are going to be practicing this in class today.